After bidding farewell to his brothers in Santa Barbara, who don't feel ready to take part in this adventure just quite yet, and after having found the perfect spot for his new activity, all Salvatore has to do is to follow the siren's song, Hollywood Awaits. It's the beginning of the silent movie age. New stars are starting to appear on glossy magazine pages. Radio is broadcasting news and music from all over the world. Every night, hundreds of dancers go on stage at the variety shows. Opera music, tap dance, applause. Enrico Caruso, the Neapolitan tenor, sings the background aria of that time. This is the environment that our protagonist lives in. This is the story of Salvatore Ferragamo, Shoemaker of Dreams. A podcast series from Cora Media for Museo Ferragamo. Episode 3, The Impossible Project.
The Hollywood to which I came in the spring of 1923 was still little more than a village in the sun. The studios were few and, compared with their future, modest in size and budgets. There was a scattering of palatial homes, Harold Lloyd's, Mary Pickford's, Barbara Lamar's, Paula Negri's, Rudolph Valentino's, and Charlie Chaplin's.
On the 15th of April 1923, the Los Angeles Times releases an article titled, "Shoe Store in Hollywood is in New Hands," announcing that the oldest shoe shop in town, the Hollywood Boots Shop, has a new manager, the shoemaker from Santa Barbara, Salvatore Ferragamo.
After a thorough survey of likely sites, I settled on 2-story premises at the corner of Hollywood and Las Palmas Boulevards, consisting of 2 shops and rooms upstairs.
After about 2 years, Salvatore moves to 6683 Hollywood Boulevard and restructures the building, taking inspiration from the Renaissance for the interiors. He wants to give the impression of something luxurious, as well as comfortable and welcoming, and in the general style of an Italian palazzo.
I filled the interior with a series of colonnades designed to shut off the fitting place from the main entrance space and to ensure an atmosphere of discretion and privacy. I opened the shop with a flourish. The stars sent goodwill messages and huge bunches of flowers, and many came in person. My life had taken another tack.
Salvatore is immediately recognized as a point of reference, thanks to his old friends of the American Film Company. He starts an intense collaboration with the great director Cecil B. DeMille, creating shoes for many of his films, such as the period-based colossal The 10 Commandments in 1923.
I had never designed shoes for the Babylonian, Egyptian, Hebraic period, and my knowledge of the times was nil. Yet, my designs harmonized perfectly with the costumes, because I believe I had remembered them.
That feeling of looking back into memories of the past to create his models is a recurring theme in his autobiography. Let's discuss this aspect with the help of Elvira Valeri.
Fare il calzolaio corrisponde.
For him, being a shoemaker is a sort of calling, which is how he defines it. It seems that the doctrine of reminiscence is at the forefront of his mind, especially in Hollywood, where he meets many important members of the Theosophical Society, which was very influential in the movie business. His private library shows us the image of a man searching for the essence of life between humanity and what lies beyond. This is the relationship of a man looking for the essence of life itself.
Che ha a che fare appunto con l'essenza della vita.
Salvatore's genius doesn't just lie in his magical talent, which we could call subconscious archaeology, or the ability to instinctively choose the perfect style of footwear from long ago. Thanks to the Hollywood boot shop and its eccentric customers, Salvatore finds the chance to look inspiringly towards the future, opening up to new and unexpected creations, as told by Stefania Ricci.
From magazine articles, we can imply that, for example, Lola Todd creates a sort of total look. A leopard fur with a leopard stocking, shoe. Corkscrew heels with fake pearls for Gloria Swanson. Or multicolored shoes for Lillian Gish. Or wonderful sandals for Esther Ralston, with a snake which slithers from the tip and twists around the actress's leg. This is the time in which he makes his most astonishing pair, costing an unheard amount of $500. He makes a pair of sandals for a movie actress, using a special fabric of minuscule and rare Mexican hummingbird feathers. Fashion magazines and newspapers of the time publish Ferragamo's shoes, so we can see satin shoes with glitter powder, some with special decorations and painted fabrics. There's no restraint to ornamentation nor material.
By 1923 in Hollywood, Salvatore is 25 years old, and he's sharing his work, youth, and success with the stars of that time. We can see the blossoming of many a friendship. For example, he's known to eat pasta in his North Beach Drive house with Rodolfo Valentino, who's also Italian.
Then too, I went to parties, occasions I at once enjoyed and detested. I liked the company and the fun, and it was good for business too. But I hated the drinking and the late hours. I always had work to do the next morning. I learned my lesson at my first party. It was thrown by Barbara Lamar one Saturday night, a few months after I had gone to Hollywood, and was attended by virtually every star in Hollywood. It was tremendously exciting. Everyone was pleasant and charming and kept thrusting drinks at me. After the fourth drink, I think it was, though I wasn't keeping an accurate score, I passed out. After that, I accepted party invitations warily.
Any other young man would be overwhelmed by the electrifying Hollywood of the 20s. But as always, Salvatore walks his own path, and he's never bereft of his magic aura. He has new projects on hand, and most importantly, a problem to solve. How to make enough shoes to satisfy the increasing number of requests. Salvatore soon realizes that he can't keep up such an ambitious activity through craftsmanship alone. But we also know how his experience at the Thomas G. Plant Shoe Factory left him with an aversion towards factory production. Salvatore needs to make a choice, and the consequences will be very important.
I wanted to put my shoes on the feet of as many people as possible. Therefore, I must enlist the aid of machines. The arrangement called for me to make up the lasts in the appropriate range of fittings, and the makers would turn them out in the quantities I required to my styles, patterns, and designs.
In February 1926, Salvatore opens Ferragamo Incorporated, a company with 10 partners and a capital of $250,000. After a long search, Salvatore chooses the best factories of the USA, and they start making hundreds of pairs of shoes a week according to his models and shapes. The Hollywood store is no longer just a shop for tailor-made shoes, but a retail point for serial-made footwear. Now, extras and background dancers can afford a pair of Ferragamos as well. The customer base increases. The brand becomes well-known worldwide. The success is astounding. And yet,
if it worked so far, it did not work far enough for me. What did it matter that my customers were content? I was not. I would send out my ideas, my instructions, my lasts, and my patterns, and back the lines would come, An ungodly sight. To my mind, they did not fit at all. To me, they were a disgrace.
Salvatore is facing a new challenge. Having chosen machinery forces him once again to find a new solution. How can he continue to produce so many shoes without losing quality?
The answer came one day, as the answer to a stalemate usually comes, in a wild simplicity. If I could maintain my output only by using the methods of mass production, if the only way I could maintain my standards and my reputation was by the manufacture of handmade shoes, why then not a system of making handmade shoes by mass production? One man could make only so many shoes in a week, but multiply the number of shoemakers and you multiply the number of shoes. And where else would I find the shoemakers but in Italy?
A few months later, a well-dressed 29-year-old walks off the Roma passenger ship onto the port of Naples. The Italian newspapers report enthusiastically, "It's Salvatore Ferragamo, the shoemaker of stars." Salvatore probably remembers his years in Naples too optimistically. He thinks he'll find many craftsmen ready to assist him in his project. However, that's not the case. Many of the city's shoemakers are suspicious, even disdainful towards this young Italian who made his future in America.
They made it clear that in their eyes, I was nothing more than an Italo-American go-getter, a hustler, an expatriate with the usual quota of high-pressure ideas from across the Atlantic.
The same happens with the shoemakers of the South, as well as those of Rome, Verona, Venice, Padua, Milan, and Turin.
I was in despair. I had been in Italy far too long and nothing had been accomplished. Nothing. What could I do? I could not disappoint the hundreds of women who were waiting for the new designs that Ferragamo had promised. Besides, I knew it could be done. I knew it in my bones. I knew it in my heart. I came at last to Florence and thought, surely this beautiful city, with its centuries of wealth in art and its long traditions of noble leatherwork, I can find the answer to my problem.
Elvira Valeri tells us what Florence means for American culture in the early 20th century and why Salvatore chooses the Tuscan capital for his new project.
Già nell'Ottocento Firenze
Florence was a model for Western culture back in the 19th century because it not only produced incredible architecture and art, but also for defining the prototype of the self-made man. Florence in the 20s has also become the beating heart of modernity, of a new culture of artisanship, as well as tourism. Several factors seem to indicate the Tuscan capital as the perfect ground for his project.
Salvatore rents a laboratory at Via Manelli 57 in Santa Croce, a popular neighborhood that traditionally housed woolworkers and tanners. He creates a new Italian company, Ferragamo & C, with links to the American one, and he hires about 60 shoemakers, offering them higher-than-average salaries and teaching revolutionary manufacturing techniques. Understandably, the shoemakers of Florence have trouble following Salvatore's innovations. They're used to traditional techniques and have never had such original models in their hands. Salvatore isn't discouraged. He knows he makes the most extraordinary shoes ever seen. Stefania Ricci helps us recreate the first model of Salvatore Ferragamo in Italy.
We don't know much about the early models because we don't have documentation. However, we can see from his earliest patents that these are models with simple shapes, pumps, sandals, or tied shoes, but made unique by stripes of various colors, embroidered uppers, and a refinement both in color and decoration that we will see develop in the following years.
It's been 13 years since a boy with a suitcase left on the passenger ship Stampaglia for Boston. Now, in spring 1928, that boy is a name, Salvatore Ferragamo, the shoemaker, and he's ready to go back to America. In his suitcase, he has 18 pairs of shoes, unique and original models, handmade in his Florentine lab, and created for the overseas market and Hollywood. In New York, George Miller, president of Miller & Sons Shoe Factories, is one of his largest buyers, and the first to whom Salvatore wants to show the new Ferragamo collection.
In New York, I booked a room at the Hotel Roosevelt, spread out my 18 shoes lovingly in a beautiful display in a small adjoining room, and went to the telephone. Disappointment awaited me. George Miller was out of town. I waited. Next day, he did not come, nor the next, nor the next. Each day, there was some reason why he was detained. And it was not until the morning of the 8th day that he and a flock of his experts and executives turned up at the Hotel Roosevelt. The salutations were scarcely over before they were heading for the display room. The entire scene was played in a strange silence. Miller examined the 18th shoe and then put it down. He turned and at last broke the silence. "Well, Salvatore," he said slowly, "you have got nothing. Nothing. Forget about all this. You've got nothing here. Absolutely nothing."
Salvatore is shocked. He can hardly hold a polite smile as he covers up his embarrassment and leads Miller to the door. How could it be that such an important client isn't satisfied?
When the door was closed behind them, I found myself sitting in the display room. As I sat in my misery and looked at those beautiful shoes, I heard them speaking to me. They said, "Don't be a fool, Salvatore. Forget that man's opinion. Look at what you have done already. Get busy. Work, work, work." I tell you, it was a voice I could hear. The work I had done talked to me. The shoes wanted me to do something. I looked again and again. I said, "It is not true. They did not tell me that. It is impossible that I have nothing when all that is in my mind has been brought into being."
Salvatore, despite his disappointment and fear of failure, goes back to work. He calls up Manuel Gerten, another important buyer, and convinces him to come to the Roosevelt Hotel in New York right away. He props up the 18 pairs of shoes once more on their felt pedestals and waits. Gerten's reaction is the exact opposite. The shoes are splendid. Salvatore immediately finds himself with a lucrative order. The same goes for buyers in Chicago, Hollywood, and Los Angeles, which he visits personally. Salvatore thinks to himself, "My shoes were right." In California, he receives a triumphant welcome. All the radios and magazines are talking about the new Ferragamo collection. Despite the auspicious beginning, his stay in Hollywood won't end as expected. He'll clash with his American partners on financial management, where Salvatore is struggling, and there's worrying news from Italy as well. In May 1928, Salvatore needs to return to Florence, where he'll be let down once again.
I returned to Florence to find not a business, but a shambles. Although my shoemakers had been fully paid during my absence, they had played ducks and drakes with my organization. As soon as I returned there, a series of arguments and yet more arguments began until I felt sick. Many of my shoemakers were 50 and 60 years old and had been making shoes all their lives. Now they refused to make the shoes the way I wanted them made. The Gordon knot had to be cut, and so I cut it. One day I dismissed the remaining workman, looked round the empty factory, and went out in search of new men. This time I was determined to have nothing to do with any shoemaker who had learned the craft. I would have no more prejudice in my business. I would have people who knew and believed in my work.
Salvatore's new world needs collaborators that can look towards the future. He finds about 75 of these and together they start a production that works like a sort of human factory line, where each artisan specializes in one single phase of the production. The idea is a success. Hundreds of shoes leave the Via Manelli labs, and they not only reach the shores of America, but also the most luxurious stores of London, Paris, Berlin, and Amsterdam.
Yet all was not well. In California, my associates began to take profits out of the business instead of sending the money back to me in Florence for expansion and the guarantee of future greater profits. I was selling every pair of shoes I could make, and output was rising every day, yet the company's finances grew worse and worse.
Salvatore suffers from his partner's inability to manage distribution in America, and he refuses their request to start up industrial production. What follows is a constant succession of board meetings and book checking, but the liquidity just isn't enough.
Matters went from bad to worse. My associates sold the shop in Hollywood, after all, for a song.
It's the start of the American crash of '29 as told by Elvira Valeri.
Ha inizio quella che è stata chiamata la Grande Depressione.
It's the start of what will be called the Great Depression. In the USA, about 1,000 companies fail in 3 years, and about 5,000 smaller banks are forced to close. The crisis soon affects Europe as well, but in a different way. And this is due to the tight connection between the American financial system and other European realities. In Germany, the devastating economic crisis will have the political result of bringing Hitler's Nazi socialism to power.
The financial crisis and the closing of the Hollywood store will affect Salvatore's activity greatly, but not his creativity, which in this period reaches its height as told by Stefania Ricci.
Ferragamo cerca a Firenze.
In Florence, Ferragamo seeks out a connection to its traditional artisanship. The two great points of reference are the old traditions of embroidery and needlepoint lace. However, this type of lace is renewed in its use of color and especially in decoration. Next to this tradition, there's also great attraction towards contemporary art forms, especially futurism, such as in the uses of patchworks, colors, and decorative elements. Color is the main element in this quest for inspiration, a break from the blacks and browns of current fashion, where shoes can shine as the real stars of the show.
La vera protagonista dell'abbigliamento.
Beauty, harmony, balance of shapes and color is still not enough to avoid the tragedy that will soon befall Salvatore. Even though in the early 30s, Salvatore has founded a wholly new Italian company disconnected from the American one which is collapsing. Production is hindered by the world crisis. Salvatore does whatever is in his power to avoid the worst.
As financial issues became more acute, I was forced into the hands of moneylenders. I created obligations in my own name, in my mother's name, and in my relatives' names. But there was no alternative if I was to keep my business alive. Besides, it was only a temporary measure. I was selling my shoes. My business was expanding. I would pull through soon. Soon I would pull through. I did not pull through. In July 1933, the usurers foreclosed. I was bankrupt.
You have listened to a podcast by Cora Media for Museo Ferragamo, written by Rosella Bettinardi, editing by Davide Savelli. Executive producer is Lia Chiovari. English version translated by John Vincent Aquilecchia, with the participation of Stefania Ricci, Elvira Valeri. Voice of Salvatore Ferragamo, Eric Alexander. Narrator, Caterina Yuca Sforza. Voice of Stefania Ricci, Liliana Oliveri. Voice of Elvira Valeri, Jenny Elizabeth Kuehl. For Museo Ferragamo, editorial supervision by Stefania Ricci and Ludovica Barabino. Editorial coordination by Paola Gusella. Sound and music supervision by Luca Micheli. Sound engineer, Luca Possi. Post-production and sound design by Cosma Castellucci.